Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever in the world you are. Tonight, I would like to discuss an issue of the problem with ignorance. I found this on the internet, and I thought it would be interesting to share it.
Train yourself to let stupid people win arguments. Like, isn't that a great concept? I know the idea of it makes sense, right? Train yourself to let stupid people win arguments. If you're arguing with stupid people, you're never going to win. Like, you've got common sense, they don't. You're rational, they're not. You have a better understanding of the topic, they don't. They're emotional, and they're going to constantly spew out stupidity.
It's an interesting argument, and one cannot dispute it. Uh, but when you're talking of politics, we have got to accept that the stupid people have the vote, the power to define the destiny of the country. The Greeks were right 2,500 years ago when they say that democracy to work, the citizens must be educated. And I think this is an important point that many of us have missed out. We went ahead, and when we had our independence, we had universal suffrage. We gave the vote to stupid people. Whether we like it or not, that is the reality. Some people take it personally when you say, we've got stupid people, we've got the vote. The truth is, it is the reality. Zimbabwe has been holding elections for the last 43 years, and Zanu PF has rigged them. And it was Albert Einstein who said that it is insane to keep repeating the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And I can't think of anything more insane than holding elections for 43 years, expecting the opposition to win rigged elections. And yet, that is exactly what we have been doing. Why? Because we have not educated our electorate. Like it or not, our electorate is ignorant, and many of them are actually downright stupid. So, this is where we are. To say we should ignore them is not an option, because as long as they have got the vote, we'll be stuck with this cycle of rigged elections. And after 43 years of rigged elections in this day and age, one has got to say this must be stopped. And this is the challenge. How are we going to stop this cycle of rigged elections? And my view is we have got to engage the electorate. How is the electorate ignorant and stupid, you may ask? I'll tell you. The people of Zimbabwe, by the late 1990s, realized that Zanu PF, Robert Mugabe, and these Zanu PF guys were not the hero, the liberation heroes who could do no wrong that the nation had hoped them to be. the nation finally accepted that Zanu PF, Robert Mugabe and his Zanu PF, were just thugs, corrupt and incompetent. And at that time, the nation also realized that as long as Zanu PF remains in power, they're not going to stop the rigged elections. They're not going to stop Zanu PF, remove Zanu PF from power as long as the regime was able to rig elections. So the solution was we must have democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. Very rational position. And when MDC was launched in 1999, they were riding on that very notion. The party name itself, Movement for Democratic Change, was riding on that popular notion that the country needed democratic changes. And so, 23 years down the line, one has got to ask what democratic changes has MDC accomplished in 23 years, 5 of which in the GNU. And alas, not even one democratic reform. And worse still, ever since the GNU of 2008 to 2013, MDC/CCC leaders have been participating in flawed elections. Knowing fully well that the process is flawed, knowing fully well that by participating they are only giving Zanu PF legitimacy, but they've continued to do so out of greed. Now, the thing then is for the people to realize that this is a dead end. CCC will never implement any meaningful democratic reforms that we agreed 23 years ago, the late 1990s, are necessary to get the country out of this mess. This is where the catch is. There are some CCC supporters there who cannot see that. They think elections are about Zanu PF versus CCC. What I'm saying to you is they are not. Elections, democratic elections, are supposed to be first and foremost free, fair, and credible. You haven't looked at who is participating. They must be free, fair, and credible. And in this case here, 43 years after independence, we have failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. One has got then to revisit why have we failed to do so? And in this case here, it's because we haven't implemented the reforms. And so the solution is let's find somebody who is going to implement the reforms. But when you've got people who are so single track minded, they are stuck on this view that elections are about two contesting parties. In this case here, Nelson Chamisa versus Mnangagwa. CCC versus MDC, Zanu PF. They already fixed on that. Even after 23 years of MDC failing to implement even one meaningful reform, they are still stuck on that. The truth is, these elections are first and foremost, I repeat, about free, fair, and credible elections versus rigged elections. Zanu PF has found a way of bribing MDC leaders during the GNU to stop them implementing the reforms. And they have found a way of bribing them to participate in flawed elections to give the process legitimacy. And so we are failing to see the real challenge is these elections are rigged elections. So the first challenge is to make sure that they are free, fair, and credible elections versus to stop the rigged elections. But if we are focusing on CCC versus Zanu PF, then we are caught up in this cycle of rigged elections because we haven't addressed the fundamental problem of rigged elections. And this is where we need to engage the CCC wildebeest head. Because some of these individuals, they honestly cannot decouple CCC versus Zanu PF. As long as they're told this is a contestation between CCC and Zanu PF, they will not see it any other way, which is not helping us. They're stuck. And for us to say, well, let's leave them, that is not an option because the country is stuck. 43 years after independence, we still can't hold free, fair, and credible elections because we have failed to implement the reforms necessary to make sure the elections are free, fair, and credible. That is what we are fighting for here. People like myself have found themselves in a situation where when you call for democratic reforms followed by free, fair, and credible elections, CCC supporters call me a Zanu PF supporter. It's totally nonsensical. When has Zanu PF ever called for reforms and free and fair elections? This is the kind of narrow-mindedness of some of these CCC supporters. They want everybody to fall into line and support Nelson Chamisa. They have got the mentality of Boxer, the horse in Animal Farm. Boxer failed to learn, took as much actually, to learn the first four letters of the alphabet as other animals took to learn the whole 26 letters of the alphabet. And then when he moved on to the next four letters, it took him just as long. But by the time he had mastered those four, he had forgotten the first four. And he gave up. Boxer could not come up with a coherent idea of his own. This is where ignorance and stupidity comes to his own. So what did he do? He decided he is going to accept everything that the pigs said. In particular, Napoleon was the big pig. And so he adapted this motto, Napoleon is always right. When I first read Animal Farm when I was in secondary school, I found the book fascinating, but I never believed that human beings could ever have the mentality of boxer. But now I've got to admit it, they do. We cannot deny that those CCC supporters who keep wittering about Chamisa Chete Chete, calling Chamisa change champion, and yet Chamisa has not implemented even one meaningful democratic change in 23 years. This Chamisa Chete Chete mentality is not different from Napoleon is always right of Boxer the Horse. This is at the heart of our problem. And unlike Boxer in Animal Farm, who himself accepted that Napoleon is always right, in our case here, we have got some CCC supporters who are not only who have not only raised Chamisa to the pedestal of being a demigod, infallible, but they believe it so passionately that they cannot accept anybody else challenging Chamisa or holding him to account. They take it personally. It's an affront to challenge Chamisa. Of course, it's nonsense. Chamisa is a fallible mortal like you and me. More so when you look at in the 23 years Chamisa and company have been on the political stage, they failed to implement even one meaningful democratic change, which was the number one task the nation set for them. How could we say somebody who is proven to be corrupt and breathtakingly incompetent is infallible? Beggars believe. This is stupidity at its worst. The truth of the matter is, CCC will never implement any democratic change necessary for free, fair, and credible elections. If they were going to do it, they would have done it. They had the golden opportunity to do so during the GNU of 2008 to 2013. They failed to implement even one reform. Worse still, they are participating in these flawed elections, knowing fully well that they are flawed and that participating will only give Zanu PF legitimacy. The challenge for the people of Zimbabwe is to realize that CCC are now running with the hair, the povo hair, during the day, whilst hunting with the Zanu PF hounds at night. Waking up to that reality is absolutely necessary if we are going to stop this cycle, this insanity of rigged elections and bad governance. Zanu PF has just rigged the 2023 elections blatantly. And now we are looking at the next elections, 2028. To be quite honest, I don't see any signs of CCC forcing in any way Zanu PF to implement any reforms. And I can see them participating in the 2028 elections using the same old arguments that they've devised ways, strategies of winning rigged elections. And their MDC mob, the wildebeest head, believing the lies and participating. And of course, soon after the election results are out, Chamisa, if he's leading the main opposition, will be out denouncing the process as a gigantic fraud. Gigantic fraud. And yet, in the 2023 elections, he was the one who was telling his supporters he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes just to hide the fact that he's participating out of greed. So my main message to the people of Zimbabwe today is that we cannot afford to ignore these CCC individuals who still think Chamisa and company are infallible gods who can do nothing wrong. We have to engage them. We have got to tell them that they are wrong. Chamisa and company are mere mortals like everybody else, and they must be held to account. And in this particular case, held to account for failing to implement the democratic reforms for the last 23 years when they had the golden opportunity to do so. Accepting that CCC, Chamisa and company, failed to implement reforms is important, because by accepting it, we can now set up ourselves to tackle the next important task, which is finding competent men and women who can do that work. As long as we believe the elections about Zanu PF versus CCC, Chamisa versus Mnangagwa, we are not addressing the main problem, which is the failure to implement reforms so that the elections are free, fair, and credible. These elections are about reforms and free, fair, and credible elections. Forget the participants. Until you get that one right, participants are irrelevant. If Zanu PF can win elections, who cares who their participants are, who their challengers are? There can be as many as 130 challengers. What difference does it make? We need to be subtle. We need to think outside the box. The challenge is not Zanu PF versus CCC. The challenge is reform free, fair, and credible elections versus rigged elections. After 43 years of rigged elections, we need to stop the insanity of rigged elections. And we only stop it by getting the reforms implemented. If Chamisa and company have failed to implement reforms in 23 years, we must find somebody else who will. This is not about Chamisa or CCC. This is about implementing reforms to ensure that elections are free, fair, and credible. Food for thought. Thank you very much for listening.